A slap echoed through the coffee shop like a gunshot. And just like that, every conversation died mid. You could hear a pin drop. The kind of silence that makes your stomach turn because you know something really bad just went down. The woman had been minding her own business, hunched over a laptop in the corner, dressed down in jeans and a hoodie. She'd chosen that spot on purpose. The kind of seat that lets you disappear into the background. If you've ever lived near a military base, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Women learn to be invisible. They learn to take up less space. They learn to avoid eye contact. Because sometimes, that's the only way to stay safe. But staying invisible only works if the predator decides to let you stay that way. Staff Sergeant Derek Coleman had other plans. 8 years, in uniform. 3 formal complaints that somehow evaporated into thin air. A reputation that everyone whispered about in the hallways, in the barracks, over drinks when they thought no one was listening. The kind of guy who'd gotten away with it so many times he'd stopped, even pretending to be careful. He'd swaggered over to her table with that walk. You know, the one. The walk of someone who's never faced a real consequence in his life. Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to him because, well, they never have before. She'd said no politely the first time. That didn't work. She'd said no firmly the second time. That made him angry. When he grabbed her arm, she'd jerked away and done something smart. She started recording on her phone. That's when he hit her. Not a light slap. Not a warning tap. A full, open-handed strike across her face, hard enough to send her tumbling from her chair. Her head cracked against the table corner on the way down. The sound of it made people gasp. The place exploded into chaos. 2 young privates, barely out of basic training, rushed forward and grabbed Coleman by the arms. He was screaming, red-faced, spewing obscenities that would make a sailor blush. The shop owner was already on the phone with base security, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. And the woman, she sat there on the floor, blood trickling down from a cut above her eyebrow, her hands trembling but steady enough to keep that phone aimed right at Coleman's face. Still recording. Her face was pale as paper, but her jaw was set like steel. She wasn't backing down. Coleman actually laughed. Even with 2 privates holding him back, even with a room full of witnesses staring at him in horror, he laughed because he'd been here before. He knew how this played out. His company commander would step in, smooth everything over, call it a misunderstanding or a disagreement that got out of hand. Maybe he'd get some extra duty, maybe a stern talking to behind closed doors. But real consequences. Actual punishment. That never happened to guys like him. He was too valuable, too experienced, too well-connected. The system protected him. It always had base security rolled up within 5 minutes. They separated everyone, started taking statements, doing everything by the book. Coleman was still wearing that smirk when they put him in the back of their vehicle, like this was all just a minor inconvenience, an annoying detour on his way back to business as usual. The woman refused medical treatment at first. She wasn't interested in getting her head checked or having someone fuss over her injuries. What she wanted was documentation. She wanted every witness statement recorded. She wanted every detail logged and filed properly. She wanted a paper trail that couldn't disappear like all the others had. There was something in her voice when she spoke to the young security officers, a quiet authority that made them slow down and pay attention. They found themselves double-checking their paperwork, making sure every detail was correct, even though they couldn't quite explain why it felt so important. 17 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the base commander's office, moving fast enough to kick up dust. 3 generals climbed out, and if you'd seen their faces, you'd have known immediately that someone's world was about to end. They moved with purpose, the kind that says, there's no negotiation, no discussion, just action. Leading them was General Patricia Morrison, 3 stars gleaming in the afternoon sun, her expression carved from granite. If you looked into her eyes, you'd see something that would make your blood run cold. The fury of a mother protecting her child mixed with the calculated rage of a commander who's just discovered a cancer in her ranks. Wheaton and Ower Fort Benning was locked down tight. No one Out. The base commander, a full colonel who'd been getting ready for his afternoon golf game, suddenly found himself standing at attention in his office, while 3 generals tore through every file cabinet. Every computer, every scrap of paper related to Staff Sergeant Derek Coleman and everyone who'd ever protected him. Because here's the thing Coleman didn't know, couldn't have known, had no way of knowing. That woman he'd just assaulted, the one he'd laughed at, the one he thought was just another civilian he could intimidate and hurt without consequence. Her name was Captain Janitor Morrison. She was on medical leave, recovering from injuries she'd sustained during a classified operation somewhere in Eastern Europe, the kind of operation that doesn't make the news, the kind that happens in the dark, the kind that only a handful of people will ever know about. And she was General Patricia Morrison's daughter. Now, before you think this is a story about special treatment or using connections, let me stop you right there. Jennifer had spent her entire military career refusing any help from her mother. She'd insisted on earning every rank through merit. She'd turned down cushy assignments. She'd volunteered for the hard stuff, the dangerous stuff, the missions that other people tried to avoid. She'd built her career on her own back, and she was proud of that. She'd been sitting in that coffee shop working on her master's thesis. Her research topic: how sexual assault and harassment complaints disappeared within the military system. Not because it was an abstract academic exercise, but because she'd heard the stories. She'd listened to her fellow servicewomen describe the pattern. The reports that vanished. The investigations that went nowhere. The commanders who looked the other way. The predators who kept hunting because no one stopped them. Her research was personal. Her research was a mission, and Coleman had just become her case study. The recording Jennifer captured, combined with the witness statements in the investigation her mother launched, unraveled everything like pulling a thread on a cheap sweater. They discovered a network of protected predators, guys who'd been operating with impunity for years, commanders who'd buried complaints to keep their promotion rates looking good, a culture that had allowed men like Coleman to hunt freely, knowing the system would always protect them. By that evening, Coleman was in custody facing both military and civilian charges. His company commander, the one who'd smoothed things over so many times before, was relieved of duty. The battalion commander was under investigation, and something else happened. Something important. 7 other soldiers came forward with their own complaints. 7 people who'd been silent because they didn't think anyone would listen, who'd been afraid because they'd seen what happened to people who spoke up, who'd lost faith in the system because the system had failed them over and over again. But now, someone was listening. Now the system was working the way it was supposed to. General Morrison stood beside her daughter in the base hospital, watching as medics finally treated that cut above her eye. Jennifer hadn't wanted to use her connection to her mother. She'd tried to handle it through proper channels like any other soldier would have to, because that's who she was. But her mother taught her something that day. Sometimes rank isn't about privilege. Sometimes it's about protection. Sometimes it's not for personal gain, but for fixing broken systems that destroy good people. Sometimes you have to use the power, you have to do what's right, even if it makes you uncomfortable. The lockdown lasted 3 full days. When it lifted, Fort Benning had new leadership, new protocols, and a new understanding. No one was untouchable. Every complaint mattered. The daughter of a general and the newest private deserved the same protection, the same justice, the same respect. Coleman's smirk vanished the moment those SUVs arrived. He'd learned what everyone should have taught him years ago, what the system should have enforced from day one. Actions have consequences, and some lines should never be crossed. Now, I want you to think about something. How many Staff Sergeant Colemans are out there right now? How many people in positions of power, not just in the military, but everywhere, are protected by systems that care more about appearances than justice? How many victims stay silent because they've watched the system fail people just like them? This story isn't just about one assault in a coffee shop. It's about a culture that protects predators. It's about institutions that prioritize reputation over accountability. It's about the courage it takes to stand up and say, enough, even when you know the deck is stacked against you. Jennifer Morrison could have stayed quiet. She could have let it go. She could have told herself it wasn't worth the fight, that nothing would change anyway, that guys like Coleman always win in the end. But she didn't. She recorded, she documented, she demanded accountability, And when the system tried to fail her like it had failed so many others, she had something most victims don't have. She'd someone with the power to make sure justice actually happened. That's the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. Jennifer got justice, not just because she was brave, not just because she did everything right, but because her mother was a 3-star general who could lock down an entire base and force people to look at what they'd been ignoring. What about everyone else? What about all the victims who don't have a general in their family? What about the people who file reports that disappear? Who tell their stories to commanders who don't care? Who watch their attackers get promoted while they get pushed out? The system needs to work for everyone, not just the connected few. Every complaint should matter. Every victim should be heard. Every predator should face consequences regardless of how valuable, how experienced, how well-connected they are. That's what real accountability looks like. That's what justice means. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who stayed silent because they didn't think anyone would listen. Someone who's lost faith in the system. Someone who needs to know that speaking up matters, that their voice matters, that they matter. Drop a comment about why accountability is crucial, not just in the military but everywhere. In workplaces, in schools, in communities, anywhere power gets abused and systems protect the abusers. Because here's what I believe. The measure of any institution isn't how it treats its stars, its high performers, its connected elite. It's how it treats the vulnerable. It's whether it protects victims or predators. It's whether it values people or appearances. Fort Benning changed that day. 7 people found the courage to come forward because they saw that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. How many more are still waiting? How many more need to see that change is possible before they find their own courage? That's the real story here. Not just one assault and one arrest, but the beginning of cultural change. The first crack in a wall that's been standing far too long. The moment when people realized that enough was finally enough. Real change happens when ordinary people demand it, when they refuse to accept the way things are just because that's the way. They've always been when they stand up, even though they're scared, even though they might lose, even though the odds are against them. Jennifer Morrison stood up. 7 others followed. How many more will it take before the system changes everywhere, not just at Fort Benning? Before every complaint is taken seriously, before every victim is believed and protected, before every predator faces real consequences. That's up to us, all of us. Because silence protects predators. Inaction protects abusers. Looking the other way protects the system that fails victims over and over again. So speak up. Document everything. Demand accountability. Support survivors. Challenge the culture to send. Because every voice matters. Every story matters. Every person matters. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us refuse to stay silent, if enough of us demand better, if enough of us stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, the system will finally have to change. Not because generals force it to, not because of connections or power, but because ordinary people decided they deserved better and wouldn't accept anything less. That's the future worth fighting for. That's the change worth demanding. That's the justice everyone deserves, regardless of who their parents are or how many stars are in their family tree.